We need to have a fair tax, and we need to have it now. No value-added tax, no additional health care taxes. We need to throw Pelosi, Reid. We have to get rid of Obama. We have to get rid of all of the progressives.
What do you think is the biggest problem with America these days?
Besides the taxation and the totalitarian of them, trying to take our civil rights away from us, our Constitution. They wipe their feet on the floor with our Constitution. No. They're going to end up taking me to jail when they tell me that I have to pay for health care. They can take me to jail. I'll sit in jail. I will be a political prisoner.
Now, are you a member of the John Birch Society there?
Years ago I was.
Years ago you were. Not anymore though.
No.
But you just felt like wearing the shirt out to show
This is my official protest shirt. I've been wearing this shirt just for protest for over 20 years.
Wow. And all protesting against taxation.
All form of progressive government, liberalism, pro-life marches.
Now, Mark Twain, of course, is a government-run agency. You don't feel like
I didn't want to spend $10, $15 in gas, $25, $30 for parking, $14 and a nice, pretty trip on a train. It was great.
Even though it's subsidized by tax dollars.
Well, if I'm paying for it, why should I use it?
The right wing wants to rid us of the IRS, rid us of the Federal Reserve, rid us of the direct election of senators. The radical right wants to take us back 114 years. They saw 1900 in America as like the apex of when we were great as a nation. 1900, before the income tax, before the Federal Reserve, before any progressive legislation was considered or passed, before child labor laws, before women had any rights, before women even had the right to vote. Robert Welch talked a lot about 1900 as this glorious time in American history. And he said, there were pockets of poverty. Now, if you know anything about 1900, you are now laughing. Pockets of poverty, however, he said. But it was a healthy kind of poverty. Poverty free from government interference, where every man understood that relief from dire want was entirely his own responsibility. Thus, the blessings of liberty outweighed the poverty.
By the U.S.
May we have orders that the governor may make his case? Time is limited. I won't charge this time against you. May we have order? May we have order? May we have order so that the governor can be heard?
The applause and the shouting are coming from the delegations from New York, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Vermont, that's all I can see.
Delegates, please take their seats so that the governor can be heard. We are under limitation of time. The governor of New York is recognized for 5 minutes, and please give him your attention. Mr. Chairman, Congressman Laird, fellow delegates, alternates, and friends, I move that the language read by Senator Scott be inserted in the proposed 1964 Republican platform. time has come for the Republican Party to face this issue realistically and take decisive action. It is essential that this convention repudiate here and now any doctrine doctrinaire militant minority, whether communist, Ku Klux Klan, or Bircher.
Nolan, that was, California leader for Goldwater.
Which would subvert this party to purposes alien to the very basic tenets which gave this party birth.
Senator Dirksen of Illinois.
As President Eisenhower said only 2 hours ago from this very rostrum, the Republican Party should reject extremism from either the left or the right. Precisely 1 year ago today, on July 14th, 1963, I warned that the Republican Party is in real danger of subversion by a radical, well-financed, highly disciplined majority. A minority wholly alien to the sound and honest conservatism that has firmly based the Republican Party in the best of a century's tradition. Wholly alien to the sound and honest Republican liberalism that has kept this party abreast of human needs. That has kept this party abreast of human needs in a changing world. Wholly alien to the broad middle course that accommodates the mainstream of Republican principles. This year, I have crisscrossed this nation, fighting for these principles, fighting to keep the Republican Party, the party, fighting to keep the Republican Party the party of all the people. And warning of the extremist threat, its danger to the party,
Anyone who joins us in all sincerity, we welcome. Those who do not care for our cause, we don't expect to enter our ranks in any case. And let our republicanism, so focused and so dedicated, not be made fuzzy and futile by unthinking and stupid labels. I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
The John Birch Society was the largest, most effective, and best funded anti-government populist organization in the 1950s and 60s. The John Birch Society came out of the McCarthy era. He had been dead about 18 months when the John Birch Society was founded. My father, who had met the Birch founder a few years before, my father was the first member of the John Birch Society in the city of Chicago. My mother was the second. In fact, they wrote checks. They wrote a check to Robert Welsh and the John Birch Society for $2,000 in 1959 for 2 life memberships. I guess in today's money that's about $15,000. Yeah. So they were really committed to the cause of saving America. The John Birch Society was built on this concept that the communist menace, what they called the communist conspiracy, was right around the corner, ready to pounce on the United States and turn it into part of the Soviet Union. So these were pretty scary times in America. You know, a lot of Americans were worried about the communists because we saw them after World War II. Take Eastern Europe, take Asia, and then take Cuba. People were alarmed. So the John Birch Society came out of that tradition of saying the communists are bad and they have to be stopped. Very quickly, the John Birch Society moved from those communists, those bad guys over in the Soviet Union or in China or in Cuba, moved to the idea that we had those bad guys right in our own government. So Robert Welsh, who was the founder of the John Birch Society, actually coined the term insider. He described those conspirators inside our government who were planning to take America down the socialist, collectivist, Marxist path until it could be easily merged into the Soviet Union. He called those people inside our government insiders.
Because they were inside, they were communists inside the government.
That's right. There's a group of people, they call themselves originalists. That's what they call themselves, originalists, which means that they believe that the Constitution should be interpreted through colonial American eyes, so to speak. That we can only do the things that were done in colonial America. And many people would argue that 5 members of the Supreme Court have that position. But where you mostly see,
or at least 4.
Yeah, at least 4. Where you mostly see the real power of these ideas was in the Tea Party, is in the Tea Party, where ending federal programs becomes the only reason to be in Congress. People say to me all the time, the John Birches are dead, your father's dead, Robert Welsh is dead, why would you even talk about this? So because every time I hear Paul Ryan or John Boehner or the leadership of the GOP or Ted Cruz or Mike Lee, I say send them a Birch membership card. They sound exactly like the people who came to our house for dinner. These people are, the John Birch Society was, it is, if you think about the philosophy, the purest kind of libertarian. They basically believe that the federal government should be tiny and weak and do nothing. Well, the John Birch Society started out in 1958 on a very high note. They were very much loved by the GOP. Why? Because their natural home was the Republican Party. Whatever their politics may be, they had no place in the Democratic Party. So they were naturally Republicans. And they were workers. These were people who, you know, canvassed and collected petitions and gave money. These were active citizens. So they were welcomed in the Republican Party. And everything was going swimmingly. My father told me, and actually the entire organization believed that, they would have 100,000 members by December of 1960, which is a pretty staggering growth if you think. You started with nothing in 1958, in December of 1958. And 2 years later, without the internet, without without all of the social media that we have today, you suddenly have 100,000 paying members. That was something. So they were building a base of influence and doing very well. The John Birch Society, as far as I could tell, hated every president since FDR. They actually got in trouble with the Republican Party, in particular for a book that was written about one president. Robert Welsh, the founder of the John Birch Society, wrote a book called The Politician. And in that book, which was supposed to remain secret, he said this, that Dwight David Eisenhower, the President of the United States and a Republican, and the hero of World War II, that Eisenhower was a conscious agent of the communist conspiracy for all of his adult life.
I'm trying not to laugh.
Well, actually, it's hard not to laugh. And it's hard not to laugh.
Yeah.
But what's important about that is the conservatives in the Republican Party said, we can't have this. I've often wondered what they would have done if Eisenhower had been a Democrat. But given that now, this group of people who were good Republicans, their leader called President Eisenhower a communist, this was a bridge too far.
So what happened?
So, William Buckley Jr., who we all know him as Bill Buckley, he's like the god of the conservative movement. He and a group of his friends determined to push the John Birch Society out of the GOP. And they did it. They did it. They did it so successfully that Bill Buckley said he was responsible for killing the John Birch Society. That's what he thought. So suddenly, the John Birch Society was anathema. These were the crazy people. We were having nothing to do with these crackpots and cranks. Interesting, the ideas of the John Birch Society never went away. And while this was all going on, while the GOP was sort of congratulating themselves on getting rid of these people, the John Birch Society was building a huge base of support in the South. Because after they called Eisenhower a communist, after they called Kennedy a communist, they called Dr. Martin Luther King a communist. And that particular position had legs. It worked for them.
Dr. King, the columnists Evans and Novak recently charged that the moderate Negro leaders, including you, have feared to point out the degree of communist infiltration in the civil rights movement. Have communists infiltrated the movement?
I certainly don't think so, Mr. Spivak, and I would like to vigorously deny that. I have no evidence for such an accusation, and I might say that in our bylaws, certainly in SCLC and the NAACP and CORE and SNCC and the Urban League and all of the civil rights organizations, we make it clear that communists cannot be in official positions and cannot be in the membership. Beyond this, I think I could say that the philosophical undergirdings of our movement, would make communism impossible and would have communists on alien territory. For our movement has been based and is still based on a philosophy of nonviolence.
Dr.
And
King,
yes?
the AP reported the other day that a picture of you taken in 1957 at a Tennessee interracial school is being plastered all over Alabama billboards with the caption, "Martin Luther King at a communist training school." Will you tell us whether that was a communist training school and what you were doing there?
Well, number one, I don't think it was a communist training school. In fact, I know it wasn't. The Highlander Folk School, which was referred to in that particular article, was a school that pioneered in bringing Negroes and whites together at a time when it was very unpopular to train them for leadership all over the South, and I think they did an able job in doing it. This school was supported by some of the great Americans such as Eleanor Roosevelt, Reinhold Niebuhr, Harry Golding, and many others that I could name. Secondly, the fact is that I never attended the school as far as training goes. I was there about 1 hour back in 1957 or 8. I went to deliver an address for the 25th anniversary of the Highlander Folk School. I got there about 15 minutes before I was to speak. I spoke about 45 minutes, and then I left immediately after my speech, and I think that's a pretty short period to get any training.
Mr. Wicker.
I think it's really important for us to understand that the radical right had particular growth and energy around preventing any civil rights legislation, stopping it cold. The John Birch Society was very busy about that, but they teamed up with all kinds of, we would call them racist groups, from the KKK to the White Citizens Councils to you name it. Robert Welsh was so clear about this and so frightening, he actually said that the civil rights movement was going to create such hatred between whites and blacks that it could spark a new civil war. He believed that the segregation of schools was going to create a permanent police state in the South. He actually believed in this thing that they called natural integration. This is the term that they use, natural integration, which basically meant that somehow or another, without any laws or any government activity, we were all going to learn how to live together. He said that all across the South, the weight of the segregation was diminishing as colored people gained their rights based on education and sanitation. He used that word. So I guess Robert Welsh felt when you got clean enough, you too could have a seat at the table. The John Birch Society opposed civil rights legislation because they believe that property rights always trump individual rights. So I own it, I own the business, I own the lunch counter, I own the garage with the restroom in it. So my right to ownership trumps your right as an African American to use the bathroom. It trumps your right to get a drink of water. That is the racial environment in which the John Birch Society functioned. The John Birch Society fought every piece of civil rights legislation from the beginning to today. In 1965, while most of America would say the John Birch Society will never have anything to do with politics, ever, because they're crackpots.
As an independent, I'm really only going to do this, Tim, if I can win, meaning win, the big one, not the Reform Party against Pat Buchanan, who I guess pretty soon is going to be joining because he got thrown out of the Republican Party.
Tomorrow, Pat Buchanan is announcing that he will be a candidate for the presidency on the Reform Party.
I just think it's ridiculous. I mean, he wrote a book because, look, he's a Hitler lover. I guess he's an anti-Semite. He doesn't like the blacks. He doesn't like the gays. It's just incredible that anybody could embrace this guy. And maybe he'll get 4 or 5% of the vote, and it'll be a really staunch, right, wacko vote. I'm not even sure if it's right. It's just a wacko vote.
I mean,
Would you debate him? Yeah, I'd debate him. I'd debate him if it was appropriate.
What would be a major issue? Hitler is going to be a.
I just think it's personality. I think he's a very. You know, it's almost gotten to a point where I'm not even so sure he's far right. I think he's beyond far right, and then on other issues, he's just all over the place. I don't think he'll get any votes. Look, Pat Buchanan will get a certain number of votes, just to sort of correct. But that's it. He's not going to win anything. Now, if the Reform Party wants to nominate somebody that's going to get 5 or 6% of the wacko vote, they can do that.
Circumstances have led to a resurgence of a hatred of the federal government. That resurgence has energized all of these libertarian ideas, all of this far right. The real catalyst for the emergence of new radical right ideas, in my opinion, was the economic crisis and the healthcare law. So suddenly you hear the same exact language. And the other thing is, the John Birch Society has never gone away. Never. Their membership dropped. Their membership increased during the Clinton era, and then it dropped, up, down, up, down, up. But when I started doing research for my book, I called Appleton, Wisconsin, which is the headquarters of the John Birch Society now. And I was told by the researcher who helped me that at this moment, so that would have been 2008 when I started really digging in and finishing my manuscript, 2008, they had the largest growth in membership in their history. Largest growth in history. I said, what started that? I said, when President Obama started running for president.
So here's the bottom line. I'm always willing to work with anyone of either party to make sure the Affordable Care Act works better, to make sure our government works better. I'm always willing to work with anyone to grow our economy faster, or to create new jobs faster, to get our fiscal house in order for the long run. I've demonstrated this time and time again, oftentimes to the consternation of my own party. But one faction of one party in one house of Congress, in one branch of government, doesn't get to shut down the entire government just to refight the results of an election. But as I said, the problem we've got is that there's one faction of one party in one half of one branch of government that so far has refused to allow that yes or no vote unless they get some massive partisan concessions in exchange for doing what they're supposed to be doing anyway. And you may think I'm exaggerating, but just the other day, one Tea Party Republican called the idea of a shutdown wonderful. Another said that a shutdown is exactly what we wanted. Well, they got exactly what they wanted. Now they're trying to figure out how to get out of it. Just yesterday, one House Republican said, I'm quoting here, all right, because I want to make sure people understand I didn't make this up. One House Republican said, we're not going to be disrespected. We have to get something out of this, and I don't know what that even is. That was a quote. We're not going to be disrespected. We got to get something out of this, and I don't know what that even is.
So one of the things that I think is important for all of us to understand is, while the John Birch Society doesn't have congressmen or senators, the ideas that the John Birch Society believes in are everyday talking points for the GOP.
So it's kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is.
Would you say that in a sentence?
It is ironic. I always think my father would just be dancing with joy because everything he wanted is happening.
And the Republican Party, it was they were even too extreme for the Republican Party, and now that's kind of what the Republican
Party is.
Could you say that?
That is what the Republican Party is. This is the thing. The John Birch Society was too extreme for the Republicans, so the Republicans became the same. It's like the DNA of the John Birch Society is now the DNA of the GOP. It's kind of another example of that that's going on right now is you read pundits and they're saying the Tea Party is over. Really? The Tea Party is over only to the extent that they lost a few primaries. But they have pushed the GOP so far to the right that you cannot, what difference is there between Mitch McConnell and a Tea Party candidate, frankly? What's the difference? There isn't one. So suddenly we have a right that has so taken over the core of the GOP that they all sound like Birchers. It's amazing. So despite all of the bad press surrounding the John Birch Society, it continued to grow. The other thing that happened that I think we really need to get this is the ideas that the John Birch Society sold to their members have now become very basic ideas in the Republican Party. So let's give some examples. The John Birch Society believes that the federal government should only do 4 things. They believe that the federal government only has constitutional authority to coin money, to run foreign policy, to take care of a war, to run a war, and to run the post office. That's it. Everything else the John Birch that we see the federal government does has to either be ended completely or privatized.
So that would be no Social Security, no education, no schools, no public roads.
No highway department, no regulation of water, no regulation of air, no climate concern, no pollution abatement, nothing. The John Birch Society believes that essentially the federal government should be about a quarter to a third of what size of it is today. Most people don't know this, but Fred Koch, that's the father of David and Charles, was one of the first members of the John Birch Society. He joined in Indianapolis in 1958. The interesting thing about Fred Koch, we know Fred Koch today as this strong anti-communist guy. He made his first money in the oil business building refineries for Joseph Stalin. He made his first money. Let me repeat that. People are like, you're kidding. He couldn't find work in the United States during the Depression. He found work in the Soviet Union building power plants for Joseph Stalin. Now, he says, they like to say, he learned that communism was bad. He might have, but he didn't say a word about it for 20 years. So he took the money, came back to Wichita with $500,000 of his own money, and his company made $8 million. That's a lot of money during the Depression in the United States. He took that money and expanded his business. When he died in 1967, he has 4 sons. 2 were named in the will to inherit the business. But that inheritance started a war in the courts between these 4 Koch sons that lasted for, I think, 12, 13 years. During that period, David and Charles acquired control over their father's business, which they renamed Koch Industries. Koch Industries is now a $100 billion a year, $100 billion a year business. They have relied on tax breaks for oil businesses. They have relied on government contracts. That's what they do. They build pipelines and they move oil. It's an oil company. Those 2 men now have net worth over $100 billion. That's amazing. They've used a huge amount of that money to create the infrastructure for what we now consider the radical right. This is the infrastructure of the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, Americans for Prosperity, the Club for Growth, and the Tea Party. That's Koch money that drives those folks. David Koch ran for Vice President of the United States in 1980 as a libertarian. These are pure libertarians. They do not believe that the federal government should be doing anything. And they particularly do not want any regulation of fossil fuels. That's their biggest thing. They want no regulation of fossil fuels and no taxation at all. Libertarians believe that taxation should be voluntary. I know, you're laughing at me, I'm laughing at you, but that's what they believe. That campaign for vice president taught David Koch and his brother Charles two things. Number one, he wasn't getting anywhere in the libertarian ticket. And number two, they could use their money to actually infuse the Republican Party with their ideas. And that's what they've done. So now the Republican Party is as far to the right as the Libertarian Party is. It's amazing, actually. It's amazing. The most amazing thing...
And as far to the right as the John Birch?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The John Birch Society loves the Koch brothers. In fact, the John Birch Society has done trainings at Tea Party meetings. They're all friends.
What kind of trainings?
Oh, they do all kinds of trainings on how to get people to do this, that, or the next thing, collect petitions or work on all kinds of things. They've also used Tea Party meetings to spread the idea that President Obama isn't a citizen. The John Birch Society, big birthers, big birthers. So they've been busy in all of that, but they're very good friends. They get along just fine. I read sometime a pundit who put it this way, said, not every Tea Partier is a John Bircher, but every John Bircher is a Tea Partier. So there you go. Most Americans do not realize that the ultimate goal of much of this radical right is to eliminate all regulation on business. This is where the Koch brothers are coming from. They even opposed Sandy aid. And David Koch lives in New York City. He lives in New York City and did not want any aid to be passed from the federal government to help New York recover from Sandy. Now, hey, he's not going to be affected. He has plenty of money to fix his own road. And he doesn't need the subway. But that, to me, is the most amazing thing about these men. Here are men who got rich beyond all imagining with a lot of help from the government. All their contracts, their tax breaks, think about that. They got to be worth $100 billion with a lot of help from Washington, D.C. And what are they in the business of doing? Dismantling the very government that made them rich.
But then what would happen to poor people or people who are disabled? How would people get educated?
You know, this is an important question, and one that in many ways it was the answer to that question that drove me out of the right. And I'll tell it to you in a story which makes it really clear. My mother, who was a John Bircher for 48 years, because my mother outlived my dad, and she remained true to the cause till she took her last breath. I used to see her often after my father died, because we lived in the same town. So I went up to have tea at her house one day, and she was all on whatever Birch thing it was. At that time it was impeaching the President Clinton. She was going on and on. Finally I said, Mom, stop, please, could we just stop a minute? Just tell me this. What would happen if you got your wish? What would happen if all the federal programs were out? She said, oh, it's going to be glorious, dear, glorious, the Constitution. I said, Mom, the Constitution is not going to get a senior like you any health care. A Constitution is not going to cover your Social Security. It's not going to help a man get a job or a woman. It's not going to take care of a disabled child or an injured veteran or someone who's poor. What's going to happen? And she looked at me and she just said, that's not my concern, dear. And at that moment, I realized that is exactly the point. The what ifs and the whatevers are not the concern of the radical right. Their concern is to smash the federal government, as Grover Norquist says, to make it small enough to drown in a bathtub. That was no original thought from Grover. The John Birch Society has been preaching that since forever. The John Birch Society believed in this communist conspiracy, but not that it was only the communists. They saw the communist conspiracy as part of an international conspiracy that lasted, what started in 1776 in Bavaria, and they called it the Illuminati. All of you who have read Dan Brown, you know about the Illuminati. The John Birch Society and many other conspiracy folks believe that the Illuminati is this overarching conspiracy with the goal of creating a one world government, or in John Birch talk, the New World Order. So they saw, the John Birch Society sees the communists as the terror arm of this overarching conspiracy. Now, when I was a kid, when my father called me down to the office, to the living room, when I was 13, and said, "You are old enough to stand up for your country," and I became a Bircher at the age of 13. Now, my dues were $1 a month as a woman. I was a full adult member. Men paid $2 a month. Well, my parents were so insistent on my being a true, honest Bircher, they deducted my dues from my allowance. I got $2 a month allowance, and they took $1 out from my membership. That's true. True story. Yeah. Oh my God. So I was curious as a kid. Here I am, 13, and my father's talking about this huge international conspiracy that started in 1776. The only thing I ever knew about 1776 was America, you know? That was the beginning of America in my mind. So suddenly we got these people in Bavaria somewhere, wherever that was, I wasn't sure, who started this conspiracy, and it lasted until, well, I was 13. And I kept thinking, well, how come no one ever knew about that? I mean, what happened when these people died? How do you know they still exist? I said, Dad, if it's a secret conspiracy and no one knew about it, how come you do? So he took a dollar bill out of his pocket one day and he slapped it on the table and said, "Look at that. What do you see?" And I said, "Well, I see a pyramid, and at the top there's a little pyramid and there's an eye in it, and then there's some words underneath." And he said, "Those words, Novus Ordo Seclorum, what do those words mean?" Well, I was a good Catholic girl and I knew some Latin. I knew it was Latin, but I had no idea what it meant. So he and my mother, like a chorus, said, "New World Order." See, they even put the mark of the conspiracy on the dollar bill. Well, this is my dad. I believed him.
That it says the New World Order?
It does actually have that symbol on the dollar bill. Yes, it does. But there's a whole long story of how it got there. But for my father and the John Birch Society, that was proof that it was placed on the dollar bill to tell all the secret communists, the conspirators in the United States, the time was now. I know, it is a wow, isn't it? The interesting thing about this wow is that the idea of this conspiracy that is taking America down some awful path, that idea has never gone away. There are all kinds of, if you just Google Illuminati, you will get tens of thousands of hits. And everybody from, you know, my dog to the President of the United States is part of this conspiracy, depending on who you are and what your politics are. It is really amazing. It's amazing. The John Birch Society still pushes this idea that everything that happens in the United States is a plan. It's planned, which is what a conspiracy is, a group of people with a plan. It's planned to turn America into a collectivist, socialist, Marxist state.